with all of this crying wolf for 10, 20 years before something like that happens, I can see how the population can become really docile, because they've heard it before so many times. So when it really does happen, it's almost like unbelievable.
Right. There's a lot of disinformation out there, and you have to consider the sources of the disinformation. Obviously, I have a feeling when people join Congress nowadays, whether they join as a senator or at the lower level, that they have a visit from a higher up or from their local NSA agent pretty quick on, and they say, you're going to find out some things that we don't want you to talk about. And if you don't talk about them, guess what? We're going to give you a seat in an apartment at an underground base when this all happens. And so you don't really have anything at all. You have a complete, blackout of news from the so-called authorities of Washington, D.C. But again, what do you expect? You have to consider the source. Now, there's been a lot of Google and NASA cover-up, in my opinion, on this. And I'll give you an example of it real quick that might sort of answer your question and also even move us a little bit into a combination of astronomy and the apocalypse, the book of Revelation, the last book of the Bible. So there's an object I call the Red Dragon Anomaly, which appears in the constellation Virgo. And it currently, very interestingly, mirrors the vision or biblical sign of Revelation chapter 12. Now, this is a critical, major sign. Of course, Revelation is from the highest authority, Revelation 1. John wrote it on the Isle of Patmos about 2,000 years ago. And in it, he found out that cosmologically the sun travels the ecliptic, and every September it passes through the constellation Virgo. The moon also travels close by. Now, towards the end of September in 2017 next year, there is a precise configuration of the Revelation 12 imagery. And I've used stellarium, and I've gone back 6,000 years, and I've gone forward 1,000 years. And it's complex and involves the simultaneous interface of half a dozen astronomical variables, but it only occurs once, and that's in September of 2017, a year and a half from now. But in addition to the Revelation 12 sign as it's known, the imagery of the dragon at the feet of Virgo with the sun at the head and the moon at the feet presents itself right now, very interestingly, in Starry Night in real time. Now, this is highly unusual and extraordinary. The Red Dragon of Revelation 12 may well be, and I believe rather obviously is, Planet X, as it's referred to in an earlier chapter of Revelation, I think Revelation chapter 8, in a similar manner. A colleague of mine at the university, one university in the western U.S., brought up a very interesting point, perhaps a cover-up to my intention. Here it is. Basically, he said, the areas of the dragon anomaly have been covered or patched up by Google Sky in the past. But one of the ways to actually see what is behind this patched out area is to use a program called Skyview by NASA. Skyview, what that is, it's a virtual observatory on the net. It generates images of any part of the sky from wavelengths of all regimes, radio to gamma. You just filter it. Now, when you view these images in various filters, you can see the actual color of this anomaly in Virgo is red, and it does look very menacing as it appears to have a face like a dragon with two profound eyes. It's very intriguing and quite strange. Now, just for your listeners, I'll provide very briefly the right ascension and declination if they want to go to Skyview. And here it is. Just cut and paste this coordinate. Here's the right ascension, 13 hours, 50 minutes, 44 seconds. Here's the declination, and that would be minus 8 hours, 13 minutes and 59.7 seconds. So right ascension is the celestial equivalent of longitude, and in the sky, latitude is called declination. So you just enter those coordinates, and then on Skyview, you just choose the Iris 100 micron telescope setting, and there you are. You've never seen an object quite like this one. Now, the sign itself might be a sweeping parenthetic of that entire biblical 70th week of Daniel, which is a key to solving the most complex cryptogram in existence, the book of the Apocalypse. As to what it is, the astronomical scientific community, I think, is keeping a very low profile. And the question is, why did they ever cover it up to begin with?
And, not only that, if we could get into some of the more, scientific stuff as well that you talked about, that you put together, is in your opinion, the Great Flood that's talked about and has been talked about all over the world and other mythos as well. Do you feel that was caused by this orbital, from Nibiru coming back many years ago, getting close to the Earth and caused some type of, giant tidal waves and stuff and earthquakes?
Well, it indeed could have. I'm not positive of the exact date in biblical history of Noah's flood. I think it was close to 4,000 years ago, might have been a little bit more. Very good question. Now, in fact, what that question leads us into is the main item we have historically in terms of archaeology to help us relate on a scientific basis to a prior pole shift by the Earth is something called the Nebra sky disk. Now, this is a 12-inch bronze disk, the Nebra sky disk. It may be the key to determining the last recorded time in history that Planet X actually flew by the Earth. The disk is bronze. It's inlaid with gold. It was found near Europe's oldest observatory in Gossach, Germany. Now, the story of the disk is quite unconventional. It was found, I think, in 1999, by German treasure hunters, and they were using metal detectors inside an ancient forest. However, German law dictates that all such relics are state property. So instead of turning it in, they attempted to sell it on the international market a couple of years later in 2002. Now, working for the Swiss government, an archaeologist named Harold Meller, I believe, posed as a straw buyer. The disc was seized by authorities, and then it was analyzed. Now, what it contains symbols including the sun, the moon, the constellations, I think, of Pleiades, Capricorn, Piraeus, and Gemini. Now, the disk reflects the sun in the position of a solar eclipse. What is causing the eclipse? Well, it's not the moon, which is on the opposite side of where it should be located. So I think the best deductive logic is that an unknown near-Earth object is causing the eclipse. Now, this 32-centimeter disk weighs about 2 kilograms. Again, it's decorated with gold leaf symbols, and the gold leaf symbols also reflect 4 planets: Venus, Mars, I believe Jupiter, and Mercury. Now, using modern-day astronomical software, you can plot the actual day and hour the disk was produced, and the result is very precise. It was produced at April 6, 1810 BCE at 8:30 a.m. The disk was thus created during the Bronze Age, which is 3,826 years ago. Now, there's a curved bar at the bottom of the riverbank, the Saal River, which still currently exists. Much of the disk's current coloration is green due to a tarnishing effect. And the discovery site is a prehistoric enclosure in the Ziegelrodes Forest, known by the name of Mittelberg or Central Hill, 60 kilometers, I believe, west of Leipzig. Now, the treasure hunters stated it was found within a pit in the forest near the ancient Gossach Observatory. Now, here's something extremely interesting. Upon examination, the disk reflects the constellation Orion at the very bottom. Orion should not have been observable from that location in Germany at that time. The nearest location, in fact, from which the constellation Orion, could have been observed is Luxor, Egypt. That adds to the mystery. The only logical conclusion is that this 26 to 30 degree difference is accounted for by a simultaneous pole shift. So this mystery-shrouded sky disk of Nebra is an advanced astronomical clock. It's a compendium of knowledge. And I think it gives us the best proof of the existence and passage of Planet X in the ancient world. So the purpose of the sky disk is really no longer a matter of speculation. I believe, and others believe, it's the oldest visual representation of the sky in existence, and it postulates and proves the approach of a near-Earth object causing the daytime eclipse, as well as causing a major pole shift that has just occurred, and that was 3,826 years ago.
And have you heard of the Sumerian tablets?
Yes, I have. They were analyzed by a fellow named Zechariah Sitchin, who wrote a book called The 12th Planet back around 1970, 75, I believe it was.
And the stuff he talks about in his books as well, when he deciphers the tablets or translates them, he talks about Planet X and Nibiru, the winged destroyer, and basically a 3,600-year orbital pattern or, orbital cycle. So it's been talked about for forever, basically, previous generations. And it sounds to me like we're getting pretty close to where if you've got a pretty good telescope and you know where to look, you can go outside, look up in the sky, and you can see it for yourself.
That is correct. Now, when it was first observed, however, back in the 80s, because it's so close now, it's different. When it was first observed, probably the first time it was actually observed, it was observed in the infrared spectrum in 1983 by a orbiting Earth satellite telescope called the Infrared Astronomical Satellite. And this is when all those articles appeared in the Washington Post and the New York Times and so forth. And that's when, right before blackout occurred, there were some articles over a 6 to 12 month period of time when it was pretty much spoken freely of. And then all of a sudden, I think they realized the seriousness of the matter, and they went ahead and produced a blackout. But a lot of times this is, I think, many of the instruments that are used to view this object in very great detail are, for example, the Spitzer telescope, which is in a trailing Earth orbit. It's, of course, a satellite telescope, and it's infrared. And the Vatican, they've got their telescope, and that's infrared also. That's in Mount Graham in southeastern Arizona on the top of a 10,000-foot mountain. It has several names to it. One code name, they've actually got several telescopes there. They've got a radio telescope. They're listening for extraterrestrial intelligence. And then they've got the VATT telescope, and then they're also joint venturing a project that they strangely have codenamed, of all names, Lucifer. And
right.
This is can you believe it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it doesn't right now, to the world we live in, it's to be expected. Well, it's unbelievable.
It's right. It is. And Father Malachi Martin, I remember an interview with him back some years ago. I found out about it later, but he interviewed, I think, with Art Bell or some radio show in 1997, and he said, we're looking for an object, we the Vatican. Now, he was a Vatican insider. He's an ex-Jesuit. He was a Jesuit. And he said, we're looking for an object that's approaching from space. The Catholic Church is, the Vatican is, and we think it's going to approach in about 20 years. Now, that was in 1997, which is 19 years ago. So he basically, I believe he was a professor of paleontology at the Pontifical Biblical Institute of the Vatican, and he criticized the Vatican for not releasing the full content of the third secret of Fatima, and the presumption was the Vatican didn't want the facts known about Wormwood. Well, in any case, it just seems highly suspicious that they've invested all of this money there to, why are they in the strange business of astronomy? Why do they have this large binocular telescope on Mount Graham? It's a near-infrared telescope. Now, the cover story is, of course, they're looking for extrasolar planets and alien intelligence. But they have an infrared telescope. They have to supercool it to minus 351 Fahrenheit to allow it to conduct observations. And, of course, a dwarf star, whether it's a red dwarf or a brown dwarf, and the only difference is the size in those. Brown dwarf never reached fusion stage. It didn't convert hydrogen to helium. A red dwarf is anywhere from 0.8% to half the size of our sun. Anything less than 8% of the size of our sun is classified as a brown dwarf. So it's one of the two, but the way to observe those is in the infrared spectrum. They do have red halos around them, but to determine the heat signature, you need an infrared telescope. So that's what you've got. And anyway, I think another Vatican insider stated that the Graham Observatory is used to study anomalous celestial bodies approaching the Earth. And I think in an interview with him, he compared it to what the CIA did with one of its secret eyes known as the twin to Hubble, Skyhole 12, Keyhole 12. You may have heard of that program. But in any case, the Vatican is set up like a government. It has its own secret intelligence agency. It's called the SIV. And the English translation is the Information Service of the Vatican. And the LBT, their Lucifer telescope, is two giant 28-foot diameter telescope mirrors. And it's super cooled in order to observe near-infrared wavelength range. So the question is, what do you think they're looking for?
It's interesting, too, because you brought up the way that a brown dwarf and a red dwarf works, and you talk about how it's very difficult to see unless you've got, this infrared type telescope or whatever. And I've seen so many different pictures of what could be Nibiru or some type of other anomaly, but there's a few pictures I'm thinking of in particular. And the last show I did on Nibiru a few weeks ago with a gentleman by the name of Bob Evans,